I feel you've opened the door to quite a lot of people who've now got a big platform who have been throwing out counter-historical stuff of a very dangerous kind.
No goods were kept out.
There are plenty. How many? Have you been to the crossing points?
No.
Have you been there?
Listen, man, I was in construction my whole life. My dad was an architect.
Yeah.
I've been in construction since I was a little kid. Have you ever had a construction project done?
Yeah.
I know MMA. I understand it. So if you want to talk about MMA, I'd like to talk to MMA about someone else who knows MMA.
You haven't been?
So there was recently controversy on the Joe Rogan Experience when journalist Douglas Murray came on and he said, listen, Joe, you're a friend, but I'm growing increasingly concerned about the amount of conspiracy theorists and historical revisionists that you are platforming on the show, especially as it pertains to the historicity of World War II and the world's perception of the Jews, how you're painting that, how you're portraying the Jewish state of Israel today. Joe's response was, listen, I'm not really trying to shape a narrative. I'm just kind of interested in what certain people have to say, and so I bring them on.
I'm just interested in your selection of guests because you're like the world's #1 podcast. So
Yeah, it's not. I don't think about it that way. I just think I'd like to talk to this person.
But the irony of this is that when Joe has interviewed these other people who are basically professional armchair historians, people who have kind of just done their own research or who are just asking questions or who are literally comedy friends of his or MMA friends of his, oftentimes he has no one in another seat on the podcast to challenge them. But when an actual accredited journalist like Douglas Murray came on, well, Joe had to bring his backup. He had to bring his comic / armchair historian friend and pseudo Middle East expert Dave Smith onto the show to kind of babysit.
I'm saying the World Bank did their own analysis of this, and they said that it was a 40%
you do your own analysis?
Hold on. You got to stop interrupting
Okay.
and let him finish the sentence.
The World Bank.
Douglas Murray actually mentioned that this was a condition for him to come on the show to promote his book, that he have kind of a counterbalance in someone like Dave Smith. But anyway, the internet, and particularly Joe's fan base of millions of followers, got very up in arms about Douglas's stressing of the importance of expertise in society, and they felt like he was being pompous and talking down to them and elitist. But anyway, I will show you the clip and we will unpack and discuss.
No, there was no deficit of goods coming in. I've been plenty of
There was
times.
no deficit?
No, there are
No
plenty
goods were kept out.
There are plenty. How many? Have you been to the crossing points?
No.
When were you last there at all?
I've never been.
You've never been.
Well, am I not allowed to talk about it now? Have you ever been to Nazi Germany? Are you allowed to have feelings about them?
You can't time travel, but you can.
Well, right.
But you can travel.
Okay, but so what? So what's the point? Like,
No,
okay.
I find that
Lots of people have been there and agree with me, and lots of people have been there and agree with you.
Yeah, but
so I
if
don't
you're
know
going
what
to spend a year and a half talking about a place, you should at least do the courtesy of visiting it.
all right. I just think this is a non-argument.
You don't
but
think?
Okay. No, I think it's a non-argument.
But if you're an
Well, you have to go and touch the ground.
No,
be
I
able
think
talk
you have
about
to
it?
see. I think it's a good idea to see stuff, particularly if you
okay.
spend a career talking about something. Yes. I have a journalistic rule of trying never to talk about a country, even in passing, unless I've at least been there.
Okay.
It's
But that's
sort of
not
normal. It's a normal thing to do. You're talking about. Hang on. You're talking about crossing points, and not only have you never been to a crossing point in either Egypt or in Israel, but you've never even been to the region.
Okay. Again, I think this is a non-argument. I don't understand.
No, it's not a non-argument.
Yeah, it is.
It's not a non-argument. If you're insisting that you're an expert of some kind, or not claiming you're an expert, but still talking about it, about the provisions going into Gaza or not, if you've never seen any of this going on.
So you're not
That's
allowed to
amazing
speak about
me.
things that you've read about. You can only speak about things that you've seen with your own eyes.
You can talk about what you want, as you're proving. But that is a different matter from spending an awfully long amount of time talking about an issue in a region you haven't even had the courtesy to visit, whilst developing all of these views about it. I mean, now I slightly get an idea of where you're coming from. You've read about this blockade. And so you imagine that that's what it is. I imagine you've read all the people who say that Gaza was a concentration camp. And you probably think that too. Am I right?
I mean, again, literally a concentration camp. It shares a lot of similarities, I would think.
Wow. Well, as I say, you can't time travel
Let's go
back to the
back to the
Nazi
block-
era.
let's
but
go
you
back to
could
the
go
blockade.
to the Middle
okay.
East and actually visit it.
Okay,
It's not-
So to me, this dust-up reveals several things about Joe Rogan that he's either being disingenuous or he's not self-aware about. The first is that Joe is curating a narrative. He is pushing a certain narrative out there. He may say that he's just asking questions and he just wants to hear what people say, but he is the biggest podcast in the world. And my question is, how did these people end up sitting at the table across from him? I mean, out of the billions of people on Earth, he's hand selecting very specific people to come on. And that is how you can tell what narrative a certain show is pushing. You know, these shows that say they're just asking questions. Well, they know who they're inviting onto the show and they know what kind of worldview that person is going to push forward. And yes, I give Joe credit. He does thousands of episodes. He does have a variety of guests. But if you look at the ocean of his show and kind of the pollution that consumes the most of it, the vast majority of it is pushing a specific worldview. And because it is so conspiratorial, so much of this worldview and so many conspiracy theories end with the Jews are the problem, it does at the end of the day push a very broadly anti-Jewish narrative. And again, the proof of what I'm saying is that when someone like Douglas Murray wants to come on the podcast and talk about his book, which is very sympathetic to Jews and the Jewish state and wants to paint a positive picture of their plight, Joe has to have a babysitter like Dave Smith come on the show to be a counterbalance. The second thing that we can infer here is that Joe has a core audience that he is aligned with and that he's satisfying. Within an hour of posting the podcast, there was this kind of running joke that was copied and pasted all throughout comment sections featuring Douglas on Joe's podcast. And it was unclear whether it was just bot farming or just Joe's sheep followers. You know, those things can sometimes be difficult to distinguish. But they were all making the same, redundant joke about, oh, I can't watch this podcast because I've never been to Joe's studio, or I can't comment on this because I've never studied so-and-so, making fun of Murray's argument that basically, Dave Smith does lack credibility talking about the region when he's never been there. Now, as Douglas said, that doesn't mean you can't talk about it. But if you're going to present yourself as a historian, you may not say you're a historian, but if you spend a year and a half basically making a living, going on Piers Morgan, doing live debates, making your life about debating a perspective that is against Israel, that includes basically conspiratorial views that like Israel's an apartheid state, Gaza pre-October 7th was a concentration camp, Israel's committing a genocide, then it would help to at least step foot in Israel. I mean, it only takes stepping foot in Israel to realize that the claim of apartheid is a lie. But coming back to Joe and his relation to his audience, well, a few days after the podcast dropped, while Murray continued going on tour, promoting his book on different podcasts and saying, look, Joe's a friend. I don't think the bridge is burned. I never like to leave a door closed. Joe went on his podcast with Tim Dillon and basically proceeded to mock Murray.
But wait a minute. I wouldn't
Wait
make
a minute
it.
before you say that.
Have you been there?
Right, that's a good point.
You haven't been?
And I gotta say, after years of watching Joe Rogan's show, I don't think I've ever seen him scorn a guest like that. Oftentimes he'll bring up someone he had a bad experience with or a tense experience with on the podcast and not mention them in name, but say, oh, I had an experience, and kind of describe the details. But I've never seen him act like a schoolgirl, basically, or a schoolboy, whichever you want to choose, and go behind someone's back, not say it to their face for 3 or 4 hours, and make fun of the guy who was arguing in good faith. And so that shows Joe's alignment with his core audience, that he claims he's not feeding into a certain narrative, but he's in on the joke. And that leads me to a third thing. Joe is not as open as he leads us to believe. If someone comes on his show and is basically trying to perform a light intervention or a critique and saying, Joe, I don't like where this is going, and Joe's response is to basically mock him, I think that's the sign of someone who's let power get to his head and who's out of touch with the idea that maybe he's not perfect. And the last thing, and the biggest thing of all, and why I wanted to make this video, and what I'm going to show you evidence of, is that Joe is not morally consistent. He plays hide and seek with expertise when it suits him. He mocks Douglas's insistence for expertise until it is him, Joe Rogan, who is the expert. As an example, look at this clip here of Joe basically berating Dave Rubin on the topic of construction.
But I don't think it's the
Just
government.
shitheads.
I don't think it's the government that they're like, the government gave me this regulation, so that's why I'm going to do it right.
Well, if
You know
they
what I
didn't
mean?
have any regulations, there'd be no incentive whatsoever to do it right.
No, there
If they
would
knew
be an
that-
incentive.
If they knew there were no inspectors, no one was going to check their stuff and make sure that their stuff was up to code. Listen, man, I was in construction my whole life. My dad was an architect.
Yeah.
I've been in construction since I was a little kid. You fucking need regulations.
Assuming that the government regulators understand code correctly and aren't just on the take or just just basically just taking money and signing off on things. I mean, when I got my house,
they inspect things, man. Have you ever had a construction project done?
yeah, well, I got my house last year, and we had to go through all the inspections and had
Right, but
several
you didn't
guys come
build
back,
it,
and
right?
we didn't build it. No,
Right. There's a big difference.
And now look here at Joe demeaning Stephen A. Smith at Stephen A.'s attempt to commentate MMA.
Just ain't ready, and that's how it looked tonight. Cowboy Cerrone just didn't look ready.
This sport demands a different perspective. It's not the same thing as a ball going into a hoop.
But anytime you want to talk to me about this fight, or you want to talk to me about my credentials to discuss something in the world of sports, name the time and place, Joe Rogan, I'll show up. It's not a problem.
He talks a lot of he gets real loud and everybody disagrees with him, and look, it's made him a fantastic career. That's why. And he carries that over to MMA. I think it's a bad idea. I know MMA. I understand it. So if you want to talk about MMA, I'd like to talk to MMA about someone else who knows MMA. With fighting, like you have to know it or no one's going to respect you. If you don't know what you're talking about and you're talking about it in front of millions of people, like, man, that's a bad look for everybody.
Yep.
These are just two examples out of likely many more in the millions of hours of his show. If you have any more examples that you think fit this criteria, please comment them down below. But it's clear that Joe has become more similar to the mainstream media that he replaced than he'd like to admit. Pretending to just ask questions while allowing his hand-picked guests to spout his internal views for him, and acting like he arrived at their conclusions through critical discussion and debate.